And I would like to recognize, on behalf of the people of the County of Wheatland and the town of Strathmore, the extremely dedicated efforts put forth by Florence Vandervelde during her time on the Handy Bus Board. In the relatively brief time that I have had the pleasure of serving on the Handy Bus Board with Florence, I have seen that she is almost always the first to volunteer for extra responsibilities that may arise in order to ensure that the board and the service it provides continues to function smoothly. It is evident to all Handy Bus Board members just how much Florence cares for the service that we provide to the Strathmore and Wheatland County communities. And we recognize that without the continuous efforts put forth by Florence, that the board and the Handy Bus service would be a shell of its current self in many ways. Florence started with the Handy Bus Board in November of 1986 as a board member representing the residents at the hospital. After a few years, she has been either the secretary or president of the board, and for a few years, she has been both of those roles. Much of Florence's time on the board has been as a member at large, which means that she does this not at the behest of a particular group within the community, but as a result of her care for the Handy Bus service and what it does for the people within the community who rely on it. In the last decade or so, Florence has filled the role of secretary and treasurer, which, as many people who have served on volunteer community boards can attest to, are often the most laborious and important roles for ensuring the board and its service are managed properly. I look forward to continuing to serve with Florence on the Handy Bus Board, and I want to extend my personal thanks to Florence, as well as the gratitude of the members of this community for everything she has done for us. Thank you, Florence.
Thank you, Jill. I would like to, does anybody have a camera? Thank you. The mayor wants to take a picture. Yep, I can take it, yeah. Yeah, perfect. Sweet. Thank you, Florence.
Great, thank you very much.
Very much appreciated. 1986. Oh my God.
Yes, echoing Councillor Peterson and Councillor Montgomery, thank you for all those years of service in this area. We really appreciate that. That's a lot of years to volunteer. Thank you.
I want to thank the town of Strathmore for their support too, because without their support, that was, a lot of our success is through the town of Strathmore support. And it's been quite a journey, but I hope in the future that it'll be part of a bigger transportation system throughout the town and county.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you say since 1986?
Yes.
86.
Okay, we're now I'd like to call to order the public hearing set for September 5th, 2018. Oh, sorry, we'll take a quick 2-minute recess because Jennifer Pierce.
Sorry, Your Worship. Your Worship, we just need a motion to recess the meeting until after the public hearings.
So moved,
Okay.
Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? The motion is carried. Yeah, and Florence, if you're really interested in saving yourself, you can leave at any time too. You don't feel obligated to stay for the rest of this. This public hearing is held pursuant to the Municipal Government Act RSA 2000, Chapter M-26 and amendments thereto, and I hereby declare the public hearing relating to bylaw number 18-13 now open at 7:11 p.m.
Thank you, Your Worship. Bylaw 1813 proposes to amend the Lakewood Meadows Area Structure Plan. Advertisements for the bylaw were published in the Strathmore Times on August 10th, 17th, and 24th, and the bylaw was also posted on the Town of Strathmore website.
Thank you. The following rules of conduct will be followed during the public hearing. Presentation should be brief and to the point and shall be limited to 3 minutes in length. The order of presentation shall be the administration, those in favor of the bylaw, those opposed to the bylaw, any other person deemed to be affected by the bylaw. Council may ask questions of the speakers after each presentation for clarification purposes. There will be no debating the actual bylaws. A number of letters have been received regarding bylaw number 18-13 as follows. In favor, and Jennifer, do you want me to read these out? Stephen Duke, Alture Properties. Curtis Palmer, Ovation Homes. Charles Weissig, 36 Lakewood Circle, Amanda Pelly, 120 Lakewood Circle, Jamie Fielding, 828 Lakewood Circle, Autumn Marr, 166 Hillview Lane, Carolyn Fisk, 260 Ranch Close, Ted Nichols, Character Developments Incorporated, Robert Procida, I hope that's close, Ancora Homes, Bob Sykes, 83 Aspen Hills Close, Calgary, Rick Fuller, Telsec, Oxbow Golf Course. Opposed, we have Steve Lister, Wildflower Ranch, Dan and Diane DePactor, 112 Lakewood Circle, Don Geiger, 272 Strathmore Stratford Crescent, Brandy Roberts, 48 Lakewood Circle. Does the administration have any comments?
Thank you, Your Worship. I will make a brief presentation on both bylaws, rather than sort of do the stilted thing where I do a presentation on one, sit down, then do a presentation on the other. If council has no objections, I'll just speak to both right away. And then, oh, sorry. Sure. My maps help me speak, so we'll wait until something comes up on screen here. Yeah, the PowerPoint. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, Edmund will try to keep this brief as everyone's more interested in hearing from the public than us. So bylaw 1813 and 1814 have been given notice. As per the MGA, advertisements were published on August 10th, August 17th, and August 24th. Copies of the proposed bylaw were available on the website, and homeowners and adjacent landowners were mailed notice of the public hearing via regular mail. It's my understanding that the developer also reached out to residents for comment. So the two items that we have here today to discuss are an area structure plan amendment and a sort of following on that, a land use bylaw amendment to match the area structure plan. So at sort of an overall level, the applicants at Lakewood Meadows have applied to amend their area structure plan to include a swimming lake, a privately owned swimming lake in this. They feel that would sort of help reframe the development, provide an amenity for residents and possibly others, and make better use of the land. These bylaws here make amendments to the bylaw, or make amendments to the area structure plan and the land use bylaw that would sort of allow that to happen. What they don't do is they don't commit the town to any sort of sale agreement on those lands. That would be beyond the scope of these bylaws. They don't create any obligation on the part of anyone to pay into any sort of community association or anything. Again, that's beyond the scope of council's powers. They don't address a lot of the technical matters. Those would be dealt with later as part of discussions on the land transfer and as well as the subdivision. So these bylaws really are land use bylaws. They don't purport to do anything else. I know there's been some concerns about that, and looking through some of the letters, concerns about that. All these bylaws do is change land use and change the area structure plan, which is that high level vision for the lands. So I know the developer will speak to their vision for the lake, so I won't belabor that. And instead we'll sort of look at the proposed bylaw amendments here, and I think the map is probably the best way to do that. So on the left, and I'm sorry the colors don't match, one of the things I found getting older is I can't make computers do what I want. On the left we have what's currently the area structure plan, which has that large water feature in the center of the property, and then sort of lands surrounding it. On the right we have what the proposed amendment would look like. So what that is then we have the separation between the two cells of water. One of those cells would be used by the town for stormwater. The other would be a private drainage, or a private, one on the north would be used for the town for stormwater drainage. The one to the south would be used by the developer as a recreational lake. The lake would not be owned, operated, or in any way connected to the town. It would be solely a private piece of land. Other amendments there then that sort of fall under that is allowing residential land use between the two bodies of water. As well, the developer has proposed at the northwest corner there, those hatched areas, which would be a later phase, would be designating those homes as homes that secondary suites would be allowed. Right now, the Town of Strathmore bylaw doesn't have that. However, this is a later phase, and the land use on that would be subject to future discussion if council wanted to go that way. So this shows that it doesn't commit council to future land use bylaw amendments, but that's sort of a feature of this that the developer will speak to. The land doesn't address the property to the, on the northeast. I want to say that's Altera, so that remains the same. Proposed changes to the area structure plan include alterations to road layout, land use configuration, municipal reserve, number of units, phasing of development, and pedestrian connection. A slight increase to the number of units, however, below that threshold where new traffic works are required. And additional accesses to the south and east. Regional pathway connection proposed over the WID canal, which is sort of part of that vision of providing a crossing there. And then just some general housekeeping, cleaning up some of the wording in there. So staff have supported the idea of bringing these discussions to council. Private swimmable lake and private community association are sort of new features to Strathmore and would open up a new market segment for interested residents. There would be no financial impact to existing residents of Lakewood Meadows or anyone else in terms of taxes, levies, or other fees. Any costs associated with creating it would fall on the developer. Any costs associated on maintaining it would fall on folks who buy into new homes, part of the community association. There are still a lot of legal, technical, and logistical details to iron out, which is why we're sort of just discussing land use today. So staff's recommendation on this is, of course, that it go to public hearing and then that council consider second reading and third reading later tonight. We'll can immediately segue into this. I will very quickly go over most of the land use bylaw stuff is identical in terms of advertisement. We see again similar thing here, the amendments to the land use bylaw. Again, a whole other color scheme there. Thank you for that, Mr. Computer. But generally, again, amending lands designated R1S, R1N, P1, and R3 to increase the amount of R1N, so that narrow lot housing, reducing the overall number of small lot housing, sort of a misnomer as there's a lot of overlap between those, and P1, getting away from that high-density multifamily entirely. All lands associated with the swimmable area in the park would be zoned P1. That would sort of be the case no matter what the ultimate fate of the land of that is. And then finally, that portion on the northwest, which the developer has interest in suites, would be designated R1S, so small lot. However, at a later date, the developer would bring to council discussions about suites out there. Again, the land use amendments, if council is in favor of the area structure plan, amendments are generally in keeping with that ASP. And sort of the expectation is the vast majority of homes there would be just single detached residential homes. So again, staff recommendation there is to move forward with second and third reading and then engage the developer in some of the more technical discussions and logistical discussions regarding the transfer of the land trust and how we work through that. Thank you, Your Worship. That concludes my presentation this evening.
Thank you, Ryan, for that. I just have a quick procedural question for Jennifer. Jennifer, are we okay as far as people coming to speak in regards to both bylaws presented in the public hearing? Or do we need to do a separate second public hearing?
Your Worship, they're both related. I believe we should start with 1813, and then we can ask the same when we get to 1814. However, 1813 should cover what everyone wants to speak with council about.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone present who...
Is it possible to ask a question of
Councillor, so,
administration?
well, I think there will be time for
Is that
councillors
later?
for questions,
Sounds good.
if that's okay. Is there anyone present who supports the bylaw who wishes to speak? And when you come forward, could you identify yourself, and if you're a resident of Strathmore, could you tell us your address? But you're coming forward first, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Fuel and members of council. My name is Neil Coulter. I live in Calgary, but I'm one of the general partners of Lakewood Meadows. Another general partner, Bill Maher, is also here today. Bill and I represent the limited partners in Lakewood Meadows project that are in support of the amendments that you're hearing this evening. Almost all the limited partners are friends and family members that have confidence in the Lakewood Meadows project and in the town of Strathmore. Our financial lender is Alberta Treasury Branch, and they are up to date on these amendments, and they are also fully supportive of these here tonight. Several months ago, we were informed by the town that we would not need the full 40 acres of stormwater for a regional stormwater facility on the Lakewood Meadows lands. And that the 40-acre stormwater facility would be for servicing our project only. In looking at this large body of water that we now actually only need a small portion of the stormwater purposes, we started to explore options of how we could make the water feature more of a benefit to the people and not just to look at. So we came up with an idea to slightly change our concept from a 40-acre stormwater facility to a 16.5-acre storm facility, which is still more capacity than our entire project requires, and a 23.5-acre recreational lake like the popular lake communities in Calgary and the very successful Crystal Shores Lake community in Okotoks. We thought that a recreational lake community would help promote the town's healthy, active lifestyle and fit in well with the town's motto of where quality of life is a way of life. We sketched the idea and then met with the town staff, who were cautious but supportive of the potential of a recreational lake community in Strathmore. We then spoke with Alberta Health Services to make sure the idea was supported by the people who would be monitoring the quality of the water. At that point, we met with our Quality Builders group, and they were supportive of the idea. We continued to meet with the staff, and among other things, they wanted to ensure that all legal aspects of the proposed private recreational lake were addressed. We did our homework by contacting some of the lake communities in Calgary and the one in Okotoks and found out that they all used the same law firm. We contacted Nick Denienchuk from DBH Law, and Nick has been a wealth of information for us through this process. Nick's firm will be setting up and working with us on the day-to-day work for the Homeowners Association or Community Association. We know from our 2 door-knocking campaigns that there has been some concern from some of the existing residences in Lakewood Meadows regarding their requirement to be part of a community that they didn't buy into up front. And we want to make it perfectly clear that the existing 25 homeowners in Lakewood Meadows community that purchased their homes before this proposed change do not have to be a member of the association. And they do not have to pay the association yearly fees. This will be clearly explained to them in individual meetings in the future. It will be their decision on whether they want to be in the association. Going forward, it will be mandatory for all new home purchasers to be members of the association. The builders are all well aware of this. At this point, we do not have final amounts on what the yearly fees will be because we aren't at the design and construction stage as of yet. But we have to make sure that they are affordable. These fees will be directly related to what amenities the future association wants. Even though this will be a private lake, we will be investigating options for memberships to possibly be available for purchase by other existing residents in Strathmore. We are very excited about the opportunity to have an affordable recreational lake community in Strathmore. We believe that this is a unique project that will bring potential new residents to Strathmore. Obviously, we hope that they will live in Lakewood Meadows, but anything we can do to help attract new residents to this beautiful town is a good thing. I would like to wrap up by letting Council and CAO Thackeray know that it has been, a nice professional experience dealing with staff on these amendments, and they should be commended. Thank you, Mayor Fuel and members of Council, for listening to me here. We're available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any others who are present who wish to speak for the bylaw? Would you come forward and just state your name and address? Jen, is it better to deal with questions for each person or wait till the councillors have that opportunity at the end?
Council can ask questions for clarification.
Okay, so Mr. Coulter, if you wouldn't mind coming forward just a moment, and if any councillors have questions currently for Mr. Coulter, feel free.
Are you timing people for 3 minutes?
No.
Okay.
Sure. Are there any questions for Mr. Coulter at this time?
I just have a question for.
Councillor Peterson?
Just for clarification, you noted that existing homeowners are grandfathered and do not have to pay the yearly fees. If they wanted to use the facility that was in their area, would they then have to pay?
Yes, they would, shortly. But, they can come as a guest if they have a neighbor that's there, but we'd like them to join the membership, but there's ways that they can definitely use the facility.
But the answer is yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Councillor Montgomery?
Is it the home itself that's grandfathered or just the homeowners? Is it transferable?
So what we've been told by the law firm is that they would be grandfather as long as they're in the house. As soon as the house is sold, it would, to the new owner, it would be part of that process.
Okay.
So, because it is registered on titles, so anything going forward is registered on titles, but now, and it's usually in first position, and this way, their mortgage, or if they have any debt on the land, would be first now. So if they sell, it would go into first position.
Okay, thank you.
If that makes sense.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. Any other questions? Councillor Corbeil?
Thank you, Your Worship. You said you're looking into options, but there's no guarantee that other residents could use it, right?
We're looking into existing owners in Strathmore that might be able, because you need critical mass. You need to be able to support what you want, what the community association or association wants. You'd be able to support it. If they want a Zamboni for the winter to go out and clear ice, they would have to be able to budget that. And if they need more people to be part of the ownership, then they would have to go and get that. So yes, we would be looking at different options for areas.
Thank you.
Any other questions from councillors for Mr. Coulter? Thank you, Mr. Coulter. And now, if there are others who would like to come forward, I think I saw you first. If you'd like to step forward, state your name and your address.
Thank you. Mayor Fuel, Council. My address is actually in the county of Wheatland. I don't live currently in the town of Strathmore, but I am on Range Road 260, just west of Strathmore. I have lived in Hillview. I've had 3 different homes in Hillview, and I've been in Strathmore since about 1960, off and on. So my name is Nettie Hendricks, and I have lived in Strathmore off and on since 1960. Strathmore has grown a lot, and I am glad to see some of the improvements in the downtown area. It is very appealing and suggests a conscientious approach to maintaining our urban appeal. I am a realtor with Century 21 and have been an active agent for 11 years. There are many things that set Strathmore apart, and those are telling things that we see in the growth of Strathmore as they continue. The town offers an abundance of schools and has a growing commercial and retail industry. One of the very important factors that sets us apart is our affordable housing market. Currently, Strathmore offers more opportunities for families and first-time home buyers because of what it offers, a safe and friendly community, which is within an easy commute to Calgary, where many of the townspeople work. I believe it is always important to be growing as a community, not only in number of residents, but also in quality of lifestyle. If the town can see it in their vision to adopt a community with a swimming lake and a place for winter activities, I believe our attraction will be even greater. It is fundamental to the growth and well-being of the Strathmore community to invest in alternative lifestyle enhancements. In so doing, they will attract more young families, which in turn keeps our schools open, our restaurants filled, and our retail industry thriving. It will also offer incentives for builders and developers to put their money in our town. I myself, as a realtor, hear very often from families that they are looking for a family-oriented lifestyle. Strathmore offers that now, but can do more by also considering the opportunity that is present in a lake community. I believe with some marketing and some work that a lake community would be a great asset to the town. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is there anyone else? Do we have any questions for this presenter? We have someone else in favor who would like to step forward. If you wouldn't mind stepping forward and stating your name and address.
Hello, My name is Evan Patterson. I'm 31 Lakewood Mews. We were the first family in the neighborhood, signed on pretty early. I've spoken with a number of my neighbors. A few of them are here today. I myself am in favor of the bylaw and the idea and the concept behind it, with a few stipulations and things that I think need to be said out loud. There's a lot of uncertainty, as Neil said, with costs involved, what actually is going to be done. Like, this presentation is very nice, but it doesn't tell me a whole lot. There's also the impact on the neighboring communities. We have friends in Hillview, and the very first thing that they said when they heard about this was, well, how come I can't use it? Or are we going to be allowed to use it? So there's a lot more involved than just saying, yeah, go ahead and make a lake. It's going to be an attraction. It's going to be a place where people will want to go. Kids will want to go and hang out. It's a little island in the middle of nowhere. We're off in the far corner of the town. People are going to be there. Like, is there going to be a plan for security? Is there going to be a plan for lifeguards? Is there going to be a plan for hours of use? Is there going to be a gate across the community? There's a lot
Excuse me, are you speaking in favor of the?
I am, yes.
Okay.
I am in favor of.
Wasn't sure there.
Yeah, I am in favor of the plan in general. I would just like it to be noted that there are a lot of unanswered questions involved with it that would need to be addressed in a timely fashion. Now, we haven't seen very much growth in our community, in my opinion, over the last few years. We're still in phase one. We have about 25 homes in there. I would have expected it to be a little faster. So anything that will make that happen, make more houses get built, make more families come in, is a bonus. We need that. We need that for our community to be successful. So I am and my family are in favor of this plan.
Thank you. Are there any other people wishing to come forward and speak on behalf of this or speak in favor of this bylaw? Okay, thank you. Is there anyone present who opposes the bylaw who wishes to speak? And if you would step forward, introduce yourself, please, and state your address. Thank you.
Sorry, my name is Don Geiger. I live at 272 Stratford Crescent. I didn't think I'd have a chance to do this again because this was turned down. My plan was turned down a couple of years ago. The way I look at it, public money built this lake. Public people profited from the lake by having water available for the town because of this lake. So this lake has a lot of history in town and for private use, or for public use, sorry. If this was a natural body of water, there would be a public setback that public property could not be used on the lake shore to allow for public use of the facility. But because this is a constructed body of water, this may not apply, but I hope it does. This body was built many years ago to service Slave Lake, and it has since been mothballed by the availability of water from the city of Calgary, and it is no longer required for the water source from Strathmore. My view on this is that this whole body could be turned into a very major public attraction for people in the area to come and enjoy waters that really is. It's not the duck ponds and sloughs that we have in the town right now that are not available for public use because of their shallowness and their general unsanitary condition. But this is a deep water body. It could be developed for a major tourist attraction for this entire town, not for the private use of developers and real estate agents and whatnot to make money from. It would be nice to have it so that the public could use it as a recreational facility, year-round maybe, but mostly in the summertime. This area is a desert. There is no natural rivers. There is no natural lakes. This is the closest we've got for a lake in our area. And to see it closed off for private use by developers and real estate agents just kind of gets me a little upset. I would really like to see this as a public park for the availability of all residents of Strathmore to use. I've never done this before, so I don't have the polished presentation that the previous presenters have, but I do speak very strongly that this should be available for all public people to enjoy the natural water as it could be. So that's about all I can say about it. I'm sorry I can't.
Thank you, Mr. Geiger. Are there any questions from councillors for Mr. Geiger? Deputy Mayor Bauer?
Don, have you had a chance to visit Crystal Shores in Okotoks or see any of the other lake communities?
Yes. In not Okotoks itself, but I was looking at Chestermere. There's 2 public beaches in Chestermere, and I've driven by them all summer long and seen the number of people that are confined to a very small area in Chestermere Lakes, because the lakefront itself is mostly owned by private individuals, so the public can't get access to it. And I kind of would not like to see this to turn into, no, we don't have access unless we pay for it. We've already paid for it by when we built the lake in its own right. Yes, I agree with what you said, that there are private developments that people use, but I don't see why this has to follow that example. This is public property and public use. Sorry, did that answer your question at all?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bauer. Are there any other questions? Thanks, Mr. Geiger. Are there any others present to oppose the bylaw and wish to be heard? Wish to speak tonight? Thank you. Is there anyone present deemed to be affected by the bylaw who wishes to speak now? Do the councillors have any further questions? Councillor Sobel?
I have one for Mr. Roycroft, Your Worship, if I could. Thanks, Ryan. So, you repeated a number of times, this is a land use issue. But just to clarify what that means for council and for the public, what is it that we are not dealing with in regards to the topics that have been discussed already today here, that we are not dealing with in regards to this public hearing?
Certainly, Your Worship. So, yeah, I haven't been at this far longer than I care to admit. I tend to use some jargon, and when I speak to land use, I speak specifically to the legalities in terms of the way that council designates land for future uses through area structure plans or land use bylaw amendments, as most people call them, rezoning. So those are sort of the 2 technical legal matters on the table today. Some of the more, the other matters that will be discussed, some in front of council, some at the staff level, and some completely separate from the municipality. So right now there's the matter of the ownership of the land that will be used for the lake and for the storm drain. And I'm going to try to explain this as understandably as I can. So when the land was initially sold to the developer, the council of the day wanted to hold 40 acres of that land for that future storm pond. However, at the time, couldn't figure out where exactly that would be, what form that would take. So it was the town and the purchaser entered into an agreement, a trust agreement on the land, whereby the town owns interest in 40 acres of that land. However, it's not set where it is until such time as a subdivision occurs to create that parcel, which is then transferred into the town. So that was built into the purchase agreement. That was sort of baked into the cake, as it were. So we can't discuss this evening sort of how the mechanisms of how the developer acquires those 25 acres and what price they pay. That can't be part of the land use discussion. We also won't get into all of the sort of details, the subdivision details in terms of you know, where drainage goes, servicing levels, that sort of stuff, because again, those are sort of technical questions outside the realm of land use. As well, what will be, and I know that some of the presenters do have questions in terms of the configuration, how that lake will function, how it will operate, how people will access it, how that they will pay. Because that's going to be a private lake, town and council will not play a formal role in that decision. That sort of is a private matter, and as we get involved in those mechanics, we start to take liability, we start to take ownership of it. So that would be beyond the discussion today. I think the developer, sort of once a lot of this is set, will probably come to the town with a presentation as to how it will operate, to answer some of the questions. However, that would be out of the goodness of the developer's heart as an interest in answering these questions, and it would be, that's my subtle hint to the developer, that they should be coming once these decisions have been made to make the presentation to the town so that the media picks it up and so that people do get the answers to the questions. However, it's not really a land use matter. It would be up to the developer and the eventual homeowners association. Does that sort of clarify what you were?
If I may, yes, it does. But just to clarify the last issue, should we close the public hearing and vote in favor of the bylaws, that would still not finalize the issue of the lake matter because ownership is still an issue.
Your worship, that would be correct. So that would be dealt with as a separate council item because there would be a transfer of funds as part of that, and that hasn't been negotiated yet, and quite intentionally it hasn't been negotiated yet so as not to color the land use discussions. That would be a separate council item.
Thank you, Councillor Sobel. Councillor Cox?
Thank you, Your Worship. Ryan, I want a little bit of clarification, I think, on, and I believe I'm in the right realm on the land use. So all the homes in this entire development will be single home residents, except for these proposed northeast or northwest corner where they're going to possibly have suites. So there's no condominium type ones, there's no townhouses, there's no duplexes, they're all single family homes. Is that correct?
Your worship, with regards to that, sort of in the, I always hate referring to colors, but I'm going to refer to colors. In that orange area in sort of the northeast would be a multi-family area.
Oh, okay.
So that would be, it's my sort of impression that the developer would be looking at townhome levels of development there.
It's the same as what it was.
Yeah.
It's in present.
Okay. Yeah, so that is correct.
So
It's sort of
So the
red right
orange
now and
part-
orange there, so that land use doesn't change, and that would be multifamily.
Okay, so, and that's behind where there's houses already, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Montgomery?
Thank you. Ryan, could you clarify, this revision of the land use bylaw, does this create the permission to have a swimmable body of water? Or is that kind of up to the developer?
Your worship, with regards to that, now we get into mechanics, that's my favorite part. So what this would do is this would allow, because it would, the property's already designated P1. So that does allow sort of recreational facilities. So that actually really wouldn't change a lot. In theory, right now, the developer could make application for that. Tomorrow it is an allowable land use on the land. The development permit would get turned down, but they could apply for it. So how they will get overall permission to build the swimmable lake would be through a development permit process, which would be a second application that would come later, for want of a better word.
As part of the, I guess, allowance of something like that, would the town be taking on any liability, like with regards to the health or the quality of the water for something like that?
Your worship, short answer, actually no. No, the town would not have any ownership of it. And if we grant a development permit for the lake, it would be the same as if we granted a development permit for a restaurant. And if the restaurant serves undercooked hamburger and makes children sick or something, the town isn't liable for that. We're liable for conditions we put on the development permit. So if we were to put conditions where we would purport to interfere with the operation through it, then we sort of take liability for that. But as far as the operations of a private facility, the town wouldn't be involved.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. Any other questions? Ryan, I have one question, and I've read through all the letters both in favor and opposed to this bylaw. The question I have is, one of the letters talked about stormwater for the Northwest Stormwater Plan, and it's from Wildflower Ranch. And my question is, I recognize and I realize Mr. Coulter said there's enough water there, enough area for the stormwater of Lakewood Meadows. But have we got options and for the stormwater in other areas like Wildflower, and has the town been in contact with these other areas? Were they convinced that they were going to have access to that stormwater area?
Your worship, especially with regards to that letter, I think that's an issue where probably town staff haven't communicated sufficiently with the developer, with Stephen Wildflower, and we'll look to remedy that pretty quick, to give that assurance, to sort of show our work. Because we do wish to sort of give confidence to everyone involved that there is storm and sort of the new arrangements, CSMI and others will accommodate all that. So I think, town staff will have Mark reach out to Steve and others to instill that confidence, because we don't want anybody feeling like this is impeding future development. That's absolutely not the goal of the game.
Okay, thank you. That makes me feel a little bit better about that, because I didn't want other developers who had been convinced that they would have access to that area for stormwater management, and then it's suddenly not there for them and they're left high and dry. It's opposite, I guess, what they'd be left with. Yeah. Are there any other further speakers who wish to be heard either for or against tonight in this? Councillor Peterson, did you have questions for Mr. Roycroft?
Possibly, I think, for Mr. Roycroft. And I don't know if you can answer this question, but in terms of the proposal that's been brought before us today, would this be a secluded community?
In terms of your worship,
Gated, walled?
Your worship, it's my understanding, and again, the developer will be able to confirm this, that that's not the intent. There's no intent. Oddly enough, I don't know that Strathmore has a policy against these kind of communities.
We have one.
Okay, good, excellent. However, it's my understanding that it wouldn't be the intent, and the developer's shaking his head here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. And again, are there any other speakers who wish to be heard tonight? Then at this time, I hereby declare this public hearing for bylaw number 18-13 closed at 7:50 p.m., and I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Corbeil. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? Which brings us to our second public hearing. And the hearing is for bylaw number 18-14. This public hearing is held pursuant to the Municipal Government Act, RSA 2000, Chapter M26 and amendments thereto, and I hereby declare the public hearing relating to bylaw number 18-14 now open at 7:51 p.m. And a procedural question, Jen, do I go through all the rules of order as well? That's all okay? So at this point, there have been no letters received regarding bylaw number 18-14. Does the administration have any comments regarding this bylaw? Ryan, Mr. Roycroft?
I won't abuse councillor of the public by repeating everything I've said, so there are no further comments.
Thank you, Mr. Roycroft, and God bless you. Is there anyone present who supports the bylaw who wishes to speak? Probably not now, sorry about that, I didn't want to put that pressure on you. Is there anyone present who opposes the bylaw and who wishes to speak on this one? Is there anyone present deemed to be affected by the bylaw who wishes to speak now? And do the councillors have any further questions regarding bylaw number 18-14? Are there any further speakers? And at this time, I hereby declare this public hearing for bylaw number 18-14 closed at 7:52 PM, and will accept the motion to adjourn.
So move, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? And that motion is carried. Which brings us to going back into the public meeting. Would we have a motion to declare the recess over then? No? Councillor Sobel, did you have a comment? Okay, at this time, I'd like to confirm the agenda for our regular public meeting. And at this time, I think we have talked with Legislative Services, and to make it more efficient and to help all the people who are involved who come to this, we're going to be moving in your agenda package 10.1, 10.2, and 10.3 up to 4.2 following the Alberta Health Services delegation. I think that will help a lot of people who are in attendance tonight. Any other changes or agenda items? Are there any emergent items from any of the councillors? And Jennifer?
Thank you, Your Worship. Administration does have two additions. Item 7.7, Ministerial Order Number MSL 04718, and an in-camera item pertaining to FOIP Section 24. And that would be item 14.2.
Thank you, Jennifer. So are there any other items? I don't believe there were. So then we're looking for a motion to confirm the agenda as amended. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bauer. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? And the motion is carried. As far as recognitions, we've done that previously, so that's perfect. And what brings us to item 4.1, delegation. The Alberta Health Services group is coming forward to discuss cannabis. And just so everyone is aware, normally delegations have a 10-minute presentation period, but this is a delegation that council has asked to come forward because the legalization federal legislation is coming forward as of October 17th. So we thought it prudent to have a presentation by Alberta Health Services. So this will be longer than 10 minutes. I believe you have, we've set aside 30 minutes for your presentation. And following that, we'll go directly into the bylaws arising or concerning 18-13 and 18-14. So welcome tonight, and if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves to us, that would be great. Thank you.
Good evening, Your Worship and councillors. Thank you for the invitation to be here tonight. My name is Dr. Jason Sabai. I'm a public health physician and medical officer of health with AHS in Calgary Zone. And with me is Michelle Fry, who's a program consultant with Addiction Prevention Services. So we have, for our presentation, we'll cover three main topics, and we'll try to get through that relatively quickly within 30 minutes to save some time for questions. So we'll provide an overview of the health effects associated with cannabis, talk about a public health approach to cannabis and cannabis legalization, and then quickly review the AHS recommendations as it relates to municipalities. And so if you do have questions along the way feel free to interrupt us, otherwise we'll be happy to take them at the end or later on. So one of the main points we want to make about regulation of cannabis from a health perspective is that there's several important points. One is that we need to recognize the potential for renormalization of smoking with the loss of the significant gains in tobacco control we've seen over the past several decades, and the range of harms from cannabis use itself to both users and those around them. So there are two main messages about the health effects. First, that it is not benign, as I've mentioned, and there are established risks and harms associated with use, and the public does underestimate this, so we don't want to neglect that point, and we'll talk more about the specific risks in a minute. But it is important to also remember that the health problems associated with cannabis are really not likely to match those from other commonly used substances, even after legalization and any potential increase in prevalence of use and problematic use. As most people are likely aware, even under the prohibition model, cannabis consumption is already really common, with about 40% of Canadians reporting lifetime use and 10% reporting use in the past year. So this slide just illustrates that point, with the relative harm to a substance user shown in blue and the harm to those around them in red. And so you can see here that alcohol leads the way by a large margin, and cannabis also falls behind other street drugs and tobacco. And that's from the individual user perspective. When we look at it from the population level, taking prevalence into account, tobacco and alcohol really remain the most significant by a large margin. So the main message, and one of the key things we just want to outline from AHS's perspective, is taking that balanced approach, thinking about cannabis as something we need to take seriously, but also putting it into context with the other substance use issues that we've been dealing with as a society for some time. So in terms of specific impacts, this slide summarizes what's really currently known about health impacts. And people, I'm sure, aren't surprised to know that there is pretty strong evidence around the risk of motor vehicle crashes due to impaired driving and cognitive impacts, and that cannabis contains many of the same harmful chemicals as tobacco smoke and has been shown to cause respiratory symptoms with long-term use and low birth weight in children of pregnant users. This also emphasizes the importance of considering the risks of all types of secondhand smoke, especially in enclosed spaces, and the very important consideration again around tobacco renormalization. Most users won't become at risk, but early onset and heavy use is associated with problematic use patterns and dependence, and heavy users who have a genetic or biological predisposition are at greater risk of developing schizophrenia and other psychoses. So that being said, we do have evidence around those health impacts, but there are a lot of unknowns about the short and long-term impacts of cannabis use. And that was covered on this previous slide in the top two boxes. There are a number of reasons for this. Regulatory barriers to researching a Schedule II drug, historical difficulties for researchers in gaining access to cannabis, and the time to move through the research process, which can take 20 to 25 years in some cases. So a lot of with that landscape changing and older research in some cases no longer being relevant, one important thing is to think about that cannabis has become more potent over the years. That's one of the reasons why. And this slide just demonstrates that pre-2000 consumption levels of THC increased from 20 years ago by about 60 times. So if you've seen this slide before in your packages, this is a paradox of prohibition slide that illustrates the harms related to substance use are at a maximum when governance and control are at the extremes. So the goal of a public health approach is to change the levels of harm, not necessarily to stop people from using, and find that optimal spot at the bottom of the curve where impacts are minimized. So to achieve this, when we lack really detailed evidence to support what safe cannabis use looks like for individuals and communities, AHS recommends that municipalities proceed with caution and err on the side of more restrictive regulations to help minimize unintended consequences initially. So to expand on this, there's 6 priority areas from a public health approach that can inform the development of provincial and local regulations. In today's discussion, we're largely focusing on that top row, but we'd encourage municipalities to consider trade-offs and provide comprehensive education about new bylaws to avoid disproportionately impacting high-risk groups. One other point I just want to emphasize that's not specific to cannabis is that the majority of factors that determine health, often called the social determinants of health, are outside of the control of the healthcare system. And so that makes preventing disease and promoting health shared responsibilities. And this slide just highlights how that connects with the Municipal Government Act. Oops, lost my page there. So hopefully you're familiar with the information package that was sent out in mid-February. And we've been working on that to help municipalities make cannabis policy decisions that do protect and promote health. We know there's a lot of other factors, influencers, and information out there that impact decision-making. And so we're hoping that you have the full spectrum of information around how your decisions may impact health. So I'll now turn it over to Michelle, who's going to cover the main points from that information package that we shared earlier, and then I'll come back and wrap up.
Thanks for having us again today. Again, my name's Michelle Fry, and to start, we'll talk a little bit about the highlights of the 5 key public health considerations for municipalities in the package as it relates to legalization. And they include, first, to limit the number of cannabis stores and implement density and distance controls to prevent stores from clustering, while also keeping buffer zones around well-defined areas where children and youth frequent. Second, no co-location with alcohol and tobacco and pharmaceuticals has already been addressed in federal and provincial regulations. Third is to consider requirements for cannabis education and community engagement as part of the business licensing and development approval process. Fourth, limit hours of operation by limiting availability late at night and in the early morning hours. And fifth is to restrict signage and advertising to minimize visibility to youth and to help minimize favorable social norms supporting cannabis use. And finally, our recommendation package also addresses issues related to public consumption, and we'll provide a quick overview of that and how public consumption can also have an impact on your land use bylaws. So as I just mentioned, Alberta Health Services recommends that municipalities limit the number of cannabis stores by way of business licensing in the first phases of implementation. Morrison et al. Found that increased availability of medicinal cannabis shops impacted current use and increased frequency of use. Alcohol policy has also provided a number of lessons learned. For example, Alberta has seen a 600% increase in liquor stores since privatization. Research has also shown that the number and concentration of alcohol outlets likely have a significant effect on excessive consumption and alcohol-related harms. And it's clear that alcohol availability, as alcohol availability increases, so does the social and health harms to a community. Given this information, combined with the fact that online sales will be available in Alberta, Alberta Health Services suggests that municipalities proceed slowly, as it's always easier to issue more business licenses down the road than it is to take them back after they've been issued. And that's particularly important as we still have another layer of legalization to happen in terms of edibles, cafes, and lounges.
Excuse me, are you okay if we interject with maybe not necessarily a question, but a comment?
Sure.
Thank you. What I find frustrating as a municipal council member is that having gone up to some of the conferences and seeing your information here, we're responsible for public safety and health, yet they tie our hands because we can't bring in any bylaws that are seen as punitive or unfair as far as times of opening or business license fees. It makes it difficult to look after the health and welfare of the community when the federal laws really tie your hands. So I know that council and I have those frustrations, and a lot of people think that we have total control of what's going to happen as of October 17th, but we don't as a municipality.
Yeah, some of those frameworks are there. There are a number of municipalities in Alberta that have addressed hours of operation, and there are ways to do it, and we can talk about that afterwards and provide a couple of examples.
Thank you.
Yeah. In terms of, excuse me. In terms of retail cannabis licensing objections, AGLC is very clear that they do not regulate the number of stores in a municipality, the number of, the location of stores and the space between stores. Only the municipality can take comment on these aspects of business licensing and land use. So as such, this highlights the need for outlet density and location of stores to be part of the municipal licensing process. So further, in terms of limiting stores, there are a number of options to consider. First is to limit the number of business licenses, and this can be done in phases, either on a temporary or limited term basis, or per capita, for example. Second is using separation distances or density controls, which we'll talk a bit more about in the next few slides, and the third is a combination of the two. Separation distance and density limits are important harm reduction tools to reduce access and exposure as well as normalization. Research on alcohol and tobacco use highlights the need for stronger controls around density and minimum distance. Density limits are an important tool to reduce neighborhood impacts and youth access. The Chief Public Health Officer of Canada's State of Public Health in Canada report, which focused on alcohol consumption, identified the key influencers as availability, exposure, and social acceptability, which is impacted by social expectations on how acceptable is to use in certain situations, and the opposite, how unacceptable it is in other situations. So Alberta Health Services recommendations are based on the results of an environmental scan that include provincial, national, and international information. And Alberta Health Services recommends the following separation distances of 300 to 500 meters between cannabis retail outlets, 300 meters between school, childcare, and community centers, 100 meters between liquor and tobacco retail, and a square kilometer density restriction to reduce community impacts and youth access. We also recommend that municipalities consider including separation distances from parks, recreation facilities, as well as other potential sensitive use areas as deemed by the community. We also recommend that land use decisions are made using a health equity lens to ensure that the decisions don't adversely impact the health of others in unattended ways. So finally, it's important to note that not all of these distances will work in communities of various population sizes, geography, as well as the built environments are also very different. In one community, these guidelines may make sense in full. However, in another, they may overly limit the retail outlets, which works against the intent of legalization in the first place. In another community, the built environment may already protect sensitive use areas, and as such, the distances are moot. It's important to also balance the feasibility of these recommendations while also being sure to balance health protection and availability of the product. And this can be done just doing simple mapping exercises, and a number of them. So given our recommendations, it's important to go through these exercises to visualize how various minimum distance scenarios impact your community. And in doing so, it's also important to highlight and prioritize areas for health protection and consider various combinations of distances. In some cities and towns we've consulted with, we've seen many of the AHS recommendations either adopted in full or in part. And in other communities, these recommendations may limit them to only a few sites, as I've already mentioned. In these communities, what they've done then is mapped various distances, as you see here, in order to balance protection around sensitive use areas, while having an idea of the number of resulting stores as a result of the bylaws. The last separation distance that I'll touch on today is also distance from liquor stores. And AHS recommends a 100-meter distance from liquor stores as a harm reduction policy that will help discourage co-use. We know that cannabis and alcohol are often consumed together, and that simultaneous use roughly doubles the odds of impaired driving, social consequences, and harm to self. This approach also helps to prevent clustering among liquor stores and cannabis stores with the purpose of having a positive impact on communities with few resources and vulnerable populations. And finally, in terms of hours of operation, AHS recommends restricting hours of operation as a means to reduce harms to communities. International research on alcohol availability shows that the longer hours of sale increase consumption and rates of harms. The Center for Addiction and Mental Health suggests restricting alcohol sales to 9 business hours per day, and limiting availability late at night and in the early morning hours. Most regulations in the U.S. legalized states limit hours of operation to between 10 p.m. and midnight. And AHS does recommend limiting hours of operation of cannabis stores, if possible, in coordination with neighboring communities. And now Dr. Sabai will talk a bit more about public consumption.
Thanks, Michelle. So just looking at where we are with time, I'll go relatively quickly through this part to save time for any questions, because I think you probably heard some of this material before. there are a number of reasons to really think about public consumption as an important tool to protect and promote health. As you can see up on the slide, again, around renormalization of tobacco smoking and normalization of cannabis smoking. The factors related to secondhand smoke, obviously intoxication. So we do recommend thinking about cannabis both ways, related to tobacco when it is consumed in a combustible form, as well as alcohol as a public intoxicant. And then, as Michelle alluded to, thinking about the future legislation that's coming and the complexities with the edibles and cannabis-infused beverages, for instance, and the approaches that you take, needing to take that into account, and how that could work well or not well with the regulatory approach to those other substances. So, and the other point I want to make is thinking about your public consumption decisions in concert with your land use decisions, because certainly if there's a more restrictive approach to public consumption, some of the setbacks may be less important. A less restrictive approach then places more importance on creating some distance between vulnerable groups and potential users. And obviously, this is going to be challenging to get right in the beginning, so we really do want to emphasize the importance of potentially the use of pilots, of monitoring and evaluation, and looking at the initial decision-making as just one initial crack at things. So our recommendations, as Michelle alluded to, are really a starting point for the conversation. We hope they're helpful, and if we can provide any further rationale for them, a lot of them are based on best practices from the control of other substances that we know about. As I mentioned, the evidence base specific to cannabis is really challenging at this point to use directly to make decisions. But it really does come back to this point around finding that bottom of the curve, and health being, not everything's about health. You know, we don't want to try to come here and tell you should make your decisions just about health, but that health is everybody's business, and what you can do at the municipal level, albeit with your hands tied in some cases, given the other levels of decision making, there really is a key opportunity to look at this and get things right at the beginning. So I think we can stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions now, or other point is to work with you going forward. That's one of our roles within public health and within AHS, is to be there for communities and help with decision making and developing a healthy public policy.
Thank you for your presentation and the common sense approach, and I know we face it in October, and we do want to make some steps and decisions that will help our public as far as their safety and health too, so I appreciate your information. Deputy Mayor Bauer, I believe you were first, and
Thank you.
Councillor Montgomery.
Thank you, Mayor Fuel. Thank you very much for your presentation today. There are definitely some things in here that I haven't considered, and other things that it helped me to reconsider again. With regards to addressing outlet density and population, for a population of about 14,000, which is what we currently have in Strathmore, what would be a number of retail outlets that you would suggest that we stay in the range for?
I don't know that we would have a specific recommendation around numbers to shoot for. Really, it's taking into account what you're trying to achieve with the number that you're looking for. I mean, it's really hard to say with online sales and retail outlets how much need there's going to be from that perspective. And then, as we mentioned before, as that fits in with your whole approach to controlling access and finding that bottom of the curve, there isn't one right number, even for a community probably of the same size. I think it's really more about where those are located in the community. You understand your community best, and probably can make that decision around how many and where, based on some of the mapping that Michelle was recommending.
How many, like in the United States, using the United States as an example, how many people are more apt to use the internet and buy their products online versus going to a retail outlet? Is it swayed one way or the other?
You know, I don't believe that their online sales is regulated. I think their online sales is still through black market, and I think their legalization in specific states has been more around storefront locations, is my understanding. But it's not the first time I've been wrong, so.
So we still can't know these answers to these questions.
No, I think that's
There's no
one key
where to
point
compare.
is legalization as it's happening in Canada is unique. There aren't
Yeah.
really any other jurisdictions where it's rolling out in the same way. So we can't look to one model and port that over from a health perspective.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bauer. Councillor Montgomery?
Thank you, Your Worship. Could you, I guess, comment on, for instance, why it would be problematic to have two cannabis retailers within like a close proximity to each other, like especially if it's in a commercial zone with no houses around?
Part of it's about what a community is going to be known for. So if it becomes a destination and you've got a number of businesses that are associated with community harms clustering in a certain area, it doesn't they don't balance each other out necessarily. So I don't necessarily know, even from a business perspective, if they would want to be side by side to one another. But in terms of having a store that sells alcohol and another cannabis store together, it brings undesirable behavior, and sometimes that goes along with intoxication concentrated in a specific area in a community. So a little bit about community safety, community standards, and then as it relates to alcohol, also the co-use aspect of those two substances side by side. And I think what we tend to see in communities where there's a lot of liquor stores or bars clustered together, you see higher incidence rates around crime, and from a law enforcement perspective, I would imagine there'd be concerns there as well.
Sure. Like, I think we can all agree that alcohol is a pretty bad substance that causes a lot of problems for society and for individuals. In what ways would you guys say that alcohol is comparable to marijuana?
In terms of the impacts and how to regulate it, or
I would say it's probably more similar to tobacco in that it doesn't cause people to go out and beat people up or to so there's kind of I guess I always hear it's kind of it's being assessed anyways in light of the problems with alcohol, but I don't know if it's necessarily on the same kind of spectrum even as far as as harms. So I was just wondering, in what ways you guys thought that it'd be, comparable to alcohol? Because you compared it to alcohol a number of times in your report, so I'm just wondering.
It's definitely around intoxication. And regardless of what substances is causing the intoxication, there's harms related to having folks who are intoxicated in public. And whether or not it's around violence or someone beating each other up, or if somebody's having another health issue related to their cannabis use, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be violence towards another person. That's something I think is probably less common with cannabis. But there's, in terms of just being intoxicated in public, there's issues and potential harm around that, if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Well, just that we do see impacts related to motor vehicle collisions caused by cannabis use and injuries, in the prohibition environment, and we'll expect to see some more. And so I think from a regulatory perspective, our main message was just there are some aspects of cannabis that are similar to tobacco and some that are similar to alcohol, and need to think about that balance because it can have an overlap with both.
Okay.
There's also issues, sorry to add to that, but there's also issues in overconsumption. So not everybody is an experienced user and know what that impact is going to look like. And first use looks different for a lot of people, depending on the type of product that they're using as well. So there's edibles, there's oils which will be on the market, which can have longer lasting effects than a combustible product. And the onset is quite different as well. So it's not necessarily to speak very casually just the munchies that are going to on set and, everyone's giggling and laughing. There's other consequences. But acknowledging what you're saying is the high and the intoxication does look different than alcohol.
Okay. And as far as like motor vehicle collisions go, are you guys aware, I guess, of the difference like between somebody who has been in a motor vehicle accident as a result of being intoxicated by cannabis versus somebody who's involved in a motor vehicle accident and has cannabis in their system sometime after using it and may not be intoxicated? Wouldn't they show up as the same?
Yeah, certainly. There can be all of those issues with classification of the impacts and events. When we look at it from a population level, though, we do see that it is there, and it's a significant thing to keep track of, so we'll be monitoring that. But you're right, there's all kinds of complexity in teasing out the causal contribution of that and for the approach to that's being worked out, but that's one of the big challenges for sure.
Okay. And the other thing I was wondering is just to do with like kind of business hours. Currently I can go and I can buy, cigarettes 24 hours a day at the gas station. Why would that be a problem for me to be able to do the same with cannabis?
Well, right now, the AJLC regulations is putting in regulations with cannabis to mirror that of alcohol, so from 10 a.m. to 2 a.m.
Yeah.
And much like this is one of those ways where it's not like tobacco. Because of the aspects of intoxication with the substance, it is more like alcohol, and so there's benefits to using that paradigm in this approach. The other piece is this is just first round of legislation, which is around oils and which is around combustible products, and we still have the issue of edibles in the next round of legalization, and that could look like just like cannabis-infused beer. It could look like pop infused with cannabis, like an energy drink. It could look like a lotion. There's a lot of ifs, buts, and maybes that we don't know coming in this next round of legalization, and it's likely going to be mirrored and sold similar to what we see with the alcohol model.
Okay. Do you know if is there currently an issue with, let's say, over-intoxication with cannabis, with combustibles?
I think we're seeing that already in our emerge departments, and particularly around edibles is a common one, but it is possible for people to consume too much. With the potency slide that we saw, one thing that's interesting in terms of consumption is we've seen 60-fold increase in potency of the product. And what we often hear as a counterpoint to this is that people self-regulate when they use a combustible product. And the evidence that we're seeing here actually speaks against this point, in that people are actually consuming more milligrams per day now with this stronger product, and that self-regulation isn't actually happening.
So that's like an average per day use, like across users, the 260 milligrams?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And like as far as like pre-2000, when people had access to oils and hashes and stuff like that, like is that worth considering? That maybe there isn't really kind of access to stronger stuff nowadays so much as just a different way of getting the stronger stuff?
No, this is just looking at THC in general, and I think people have always been able to purchase, hash oil. Hash oils is a very concentrated product, versus what's going to be on the market now is, it's getting into the weeds, but I think it limits it to 30 milligrams, I believe. But the point of this is through engineering of the plant itself and the production that goes. This is not the 1960s, not the 2000s marijuana that people have seen or are used to using. Since 2000, we've seen not only the consumption of THC increase, but we've also seen the concentration in the THC in the product. So it's basically through the engineering of the growth, selective breeding of the plants and things like that. So.
Sure, I guess my point was that, like today, like people can seek out weaker forms if they choose to, and pre-2000, they could seek out stronger forms if they chose to, so there was, I guess, some form of self-regulation. But I appreciate all, answering all my questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. Councillor Peterson.
Thank you, Worship. My first question is just to administration. Have we issued any business licenses for cannabis outlets?
I'm glad that was mostly empty. Your worship, I'll answer that, James. Mr. Thackeray. At this time, we haven't. Council, there was a public hearing scheduled October 17th for bylaws regarding the sale of cannabis. Nothing regarding consumption, so no.
Last minute.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. My second question is, I'm wondering if AHS has provided input to municipalities with regards to encouraging local legislators to lobby the provincial government to establish percentage of profits to be directed toward harm reduction and education. And I'm speaking specifically for groups like this, to have the information to take forward to lobbying opportunities like AUMA.
Well, I think, so AHS is both provincial and local.
Yes.
But we're also not provincial in the sense that, as Alberta Health is within the government of Alberta. So we don't lobby the other levels of government, but our role is really to work with municipalities from Calgary's own perspective to try to help with policy making and decision making at this level.
It's hard to lobby when you are the government. I understand that. Do you have recommendations around that? Has there been any talk about that? Because I see that as a significant deficit, both on the parts of municipalities and in terms of the information that we're getting, and even meetings that some of us have been able to have with pediatricians and around harm reduction. This seems to be a gap.
I believe that was on the table in early days.
Yes.
And I think the decision was to go through to general ledger, I believe, if that's the term, or the
Yes.
Excuse me.
Treasury.
Yeah. So no money was earmarked out for specific harm reduction or addiction program.
It is very much a point we would agree with in principle. That's what we would always hope for in public health is that, but it's not something we have control over.
Yeah, and likewise with us, I noticed one of your recommendations is that, that you encourage the people who are coming to set up businesses in your community to have that education component that would reduce harm. And it's very, very difficult, I think, to ask your for-profit motivated businesses to do this when the government who's legislating is not. But that's just my bandstand. And I guess, in wanting to have a science-based humanitarian approach and provide the safest possible community for everyone, that is something that's going to have to, I think, come from our provincial government, and every legislative body like this is going to have to do their part. And just in answer to Councillor Deputy Mayor Bauer, you asked about the studies, and one of the studies that was quoted in this report, Morrison's, he does talk about sampling block groups and what the increases are around density, and the report is really interesting to read because he talks specifically about the dangers of putting outlets in communities with large numbers of children, and it's good to be a small town where you understand your demographic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a question for you in regards to, I'm not sure if you would know or not. I believe AGLC is limiting what your community can have as well. Are they not limiting who they're actually giving, I guess, permission to? Like, you have to apply to them before you even apply to the town for a business license. Am I correct? No.
My understanding is it's a bit of a parallel process. And we're not AGLC, so
Right.
I'm not immersed in that. But my understanding is there is a parallel process, and I can't recall, at the very end, if you require the business license to get the AGLC license or vice versa.
AGLC first.
AGLC.
Yes, I knew that, because I think that they were only limiting, like, I think that I can't remember, I think I heard like even 6 in Lethbridge, so like in Strathmore, I can't even see them.
That was a legislative, that was a city legislature.
Yes.
That wasn't AGLC.
Oh, okay. I see. I see. So they are taking steps, I guess, in trying to limit the amount in communities. They're not, no? I'm not,
I don't,
okay.
I don't think it's at the individual community level. There's the overall approach to retail, but as Michelle said, I don't think we're familiar enough with the details to.
Okay, that's okay. That's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I only have one question, and that is, at one of the sessions I went to on this issue that we're going to be dealing with soon, it talked about a large problem, a potential problem in the workplace, in that THC stays in the body system longer than, say, alcohol, and a little tougher to detect in situations. So my question is, do you have any advice? Town of Strathmore is obviously a fairly large employer, and we have employees using large equipment, sometimes in hazardous situations. You hope it's not hazardous, but could become that way. But do you have any advice from Alberta Health Services as far as our position as an employer of workers?
we actually have a resource from our department. It's called It's Your Business, and it's a free resource geared towards human resources professionals, disability management staff, safety professionals, and it's about addressing substance use and mental health in the workplace. It's on the Alberta Health Services website, and what it does is it talks a lot about the fit for work approach and shared responsibility and the tools to move through that. And those key human resource staff management process are going to be really key, I think, moving forward with this substance in the workplace, because there's a lot of things that result in impairment impacting the workplace, and it's not necessarily the workplace's job to be, the detective or the medical doctor to figure out what is happening in terms of someone's impairment. It could be from fatigue, it could be from a prescription or prescribed medicine, and being fit to be at work is really the approach that we would advocate for, and I think Alberta Health Services is using with their own employees, and it's a free resource. It was recently redone, I think, within the last 5 years, and there's handouts and tools, and if they would like some more further assistance, they can be in contact with us. But I know you had more you were going to say.
I think that's great, Michelle.
Okay, thank you. That's good as we move forward as employers. Deputy Mayor Bauer?
I just have one final thought, and I'd just like to run this by you and see what your thoughts are. We haven't talked about passive exposure, and we had an excellent letter sent to us by some veterinarians within our community who were very concerned about pets, especially if we were to go the way of regulation like Calgary and Edmonton, a lot of other communities where they say that use in your home is okay, as long as you are not, compromising your neighbors and that type of thing. Stick to the perimeters of your home, your backyard, and things will be fine. However, we have individuals who cannot speak for themselves, vulnerable populations, as well as children and pets who are at risk here. We haven't been able to really talk about that. What would be some suggestions that you have for when we are looking at developing those policies and bylaws?
Right, yeah, so that's a good point around the enclosed spaces and where we're really thinking about secondhand smoke exposure, passive exposure. Obviously, it's not really possible or desirable to regulate what people are doing in their own homes, but there certainly could be vulnerable people impacted there. I think, out into the community when you're thinking about things like special events, or if you are, some communities are considering designated spaces and looking at the trade-offs with those and sort of the clustering of use from combustible forms, which would be, as with tobacco smoking, one of the things we really want to try to avoid in the ways that we can each control that or influence how people are consuming. So I don't think we have any specific advice about exactly what you should do about that problem, but I think that's one layer that, from a, similar to tobacco control, that we'd want to make a point of emphasis on, that it is key to try to protect people who aren't consuming themselves as being one priority.
I'm just having such a difficulty grappling with the fact that, you know, now we've become a society that we can't smoke in vehicles and we can't smoke around children and you know, we have all these things in place, and yet we're bringing back smoking, a different product, around children and in public places. And, you know, it's just, the paradox is really big for me, so.
Well, I think it just, again,
struggling.
that's why we like that slide with the pictorial.
Yeah.
Just because it's legal doesn't mean it needs to be completely accessible and deregulated. There's that middle ground where we can keep trying to move on tobacco. We can try to not move in that direction with cannabis if we regulate it successfully.
Thank you so much.
One last thing, just in terms of key message around that is that there are edible or oils available, and so combustion is not the only product that's going to be on the market, and so there's other products available. So if someone is concerned about exposure of a child in an enclosed space like a home, there are other forms available if use is deemed needed or wanted.
Particularly, I guess, from a medical cannabis perspective, that's one of the challenges.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bauer. Councillor Sobel.
Just very quickly, Your Worship, thank you, considering this is a learning exercise. On the AGLC site, it would appear that AGLC is primarily focused on the retailer itself, the person, in regards to criminal records, et cetera. And they are very clear on the fact that they do not deal with a number of cannabis stores in the municipalities, location or space between stores, matters that involve retail competition or community image, safety, and property value. So there you go.
Thank you for that, Councillor Sobel. That clears up a lot of things. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your presentation. You've given us lots to consider. We're moving into that area of bylaws coming to us just in the nick of time, possibly. But thank you very much for your presentation, and we'll take it all in, and our councils will definitely be going through it too. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We do yes?
Okay, we have a motion for a quick 2-minute recess. All in favor? back. We'd like to resume the regular meeting of council September 5th, 2018. And at this time, we, in case you have forgotten, it's been a while, we have decided to move all the bylaws that deal with public hearing and the third bylaw to, we've moved them to item 4.2 right now. So our first order of business is bylaw 18-13. Page 75 in your handouts. And we're looking for second reading. And for those of you in the audience who may not be aware, we can have discussion and questions, but second reading has to be called for first.
Have we done first reading then?
Yes, we have, because that took it to the public hearing. Councilor Montgomery, sorry.
I will move that council give second reading to bylaw number 18-13.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or questions, comments before we give second reading? Okay, you've all heard the motion for second reading. All in favor? And the motion is carried. Councillor Peterson?
Your Worship, I'm just wondering if council would bear with me. Before we go to a third reading, I would like to propose a motion with regards to asking administration to for some further information regarding this. And I would like to make the motion, Your Worship, if that's okay, and leave it for council discussion.
All right, Councillor Peterson, do you have your motion?
So, yes, Your Worship. So I would like to direct administration to provide more information regarding bylaw 18-13 with respect to community economic viability in terms of numbers of people in the community and the use of that proposed facility, the impact on the existing old infrastructure, and that would include clarification on the stormwater agreement, adequate and sufficient stormwater storage, specific to, also information specific to the location of the 40 acres, because I think that's something that we don't know at this time. And I wouldn't even mind hearing from Western Irrigation District with regards to how they view the sufficiency of 15 acres, I think, or 15 and a half acres. And I'd also like to hear about the impact on future emergency services in the case of stormwater disaster. Yeah, and yes, and point well taken. That's what the sufficient adequacy with regards to sufficient stormwater process.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Ms. Sawatsky, may I ask you a procedural question? Does that motion that Councillor Peterson have, it's coming between second and third reading, so we would come back for third reading at that time, but does her motion have to specify a date that we would bring it back for the third reading?
No, Your Worship, it doesn't. It would just be prior to third reading that the information would be provided back to council prior to third reading.
I guess James isn't here right now. Does the administration know, maybe Mr. Legore could answer how much time administration and staff might need for this to be brought back for third reading? Ryan?
Your Worship, I can probably answer that best. I suspect that we'll direct my staff to speak to the developers tomorrow, and I would suspect that the developer will be motivated to provide the information as quickly as possible to get this back in front of council in really short order.
Your Worship, if I just may ask a question for clarification, so could we also then have a detailed topographical map of the 40-acre parcel proposed?
Worship, yeah, Your Worship, with regards to that question, yeah, we can have Chris produce that easy enough.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson, and if I can just interject, I'm assuming, I believe that you want to find out more information to make sure that we're...
So to follow up, Your Worship, I have many reasons for asking these questions. One is that I'm not convinced that without doing significantly more research, that that we would have adequate stormwater. And, you know, we always talk about, you know, when you're up in a helicopter, you can see that Strathmore has a continental divide, and we know that, which side that is on. And as far as I understand, it is the only major catch basin for that area. And so I think that we make this decision, it needs to be made very, very carefully and with great consideration, and I don't have enough.
And you're thinking long-term ramifications?
I'm thinking long-term ramifications about, you know, regarding stormwater events, you know, worst possible case scenario. I'm also thinking about, you know, the old infrastructure that exists there, and you know, in terms of emergency services, you know, what capacity do we have? You know, we don't have a second pipe coming from Calgary. We've just got one. So what is our backup plan if there's a failure in that? You know, we've always sort of thought that old infrastructure would hold us, you know, for a period of time in an emergency situation. This changes that game somewhat, because as far as I know, there's still only one pipe coming from Calgary. And so, you know, I know that seems very, very simplistic, and I know that I'm looking at worst case scenarios, but it is something that I want to really, really be certain of before we move forward.
Thank you for clarifying that, Councillor Peterson.
And the other thing on the community economic viability, or not so much the economic viability, but the community viability around having a 23-acre lake and having access to the whole community, you know, what does that mean? I know that the only thing I can compare it to is the first community in Chestermere on the north side, that little end piece of the lake which is separated from the main part of Chestermere Lake. That is a private lake, a private area. And even though it has a separation, it has a bottom in it and all the rest of it, Chestermere does have responsibility for overflow from the canal relative to that. So in terms of emergency services response, I think we do have some responsibility. You know, there's a canal that runs parallel to this process.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. I think I understand why you have your concerns. Ryan, depending on how this goes, do you have your marching orders as far as timeliness? I want to respect the developers and the public who are here too.
Your Worship, absolutely. Most of this information will be available. We do have it. It's just, it wasn't sort of part of Council's package, so we can make that, staff can make that available very quickly. Some of these will require a bit more digging with the developer, but I'm very confident we can make this available in a timely fashion. The developer wants to move forward too, so I think everyone's motivated as well to bring this back to council while it's fresh in mind. So, yeah,
thank you.
Dealt with very timely.
Thank you very much, Ryan. So
I have a final comment, and I don't. You can say that this is not the place for this, and I'll certainly accept that. But one of the things in my research about designated communities in area structure plans with a PI that become insular, for lack of a better word, that they're typically led by a dominant socioeconomic group, and that has an impact on the broader community. And I don't know whether administration would be comfortable in bringing back research around that, or directing council to research regarding both the positive and the negative on that, because there's both.
Your Worship, and I'll try not to go on this too much because Councillor Peterson's touching some of my most things I go on about.
Me too. Me too.
And there's very much a matter of debate between, you know, creating sort of community monocultures. In this instance here, I think the developers mollified that somewhat. There's a limited degree of townhomes and that suite area. But as well, we want to avoid drawing potential density away from our downtown core, where it has the advantage of course, serving our businesses and hewing to council's strategic direction that way. That being said, one of the first marching orders that Mr. Rebello has as the new manager of planning is going to be to put together the terms of reference for the new municipal development plan, which we're really going to grapple probably over the next, I'm going to say 6 months, but it's probably going to be a year because I really love this stuff, over a lot of these big questions regarding that. So I think we can produce that research as part of these discussions, but we may have a more fulsome discussion as part of the MDP, and I think Justin will be leading us through that.
And I guess with regards to that the topic around economic viability, as I was going through these bylaws, you know, in physically secluded communities, and where gated communities or secluded communities are led by dominant socioeconomic groups, if there isn't some kind of sustainability built into the process, municipalities can wind up in very, very serious situations, evidenced by Oregon and California. There's very good case studies that show the devastating impact on communities where sustainability isn't built in, what it does to taxpayers and future community considerations. But thank you, Your Worship, and Mr. Roycroft and Mr. Councillor Sobel for your...
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from councillors? I believe you've heard the motion, and I think you have it on your screen. So, you've heard the motion by Councillor Peterson. All in favor? And the motion is carried. We're putting this off until more information is provided, and the direction to staff and administration is to do this in a timely and speedy, efficient manner. And that brings us to bylaw number 18-14, which I assume is a very similar situation we're dealing with. And we're looking for second reading.
Your Worship, I'd move second reading.
Is there any discussion or comments as far as second reading goes on bylaw number 18-14? All in favor? And Councillor Peterson, then are you following with the same?
Your Worship, if we could direct administration to be inclusive of 18-14 to be brought back at the same time for consideration of council.
Procedure question, Jen, is that okay for you to have it in that form? Okay, so that will be coming back to us. Oh, you are saying it should be done separately? No.
Your Worship, you will, yes, you will
Okay.
need a motion to postpone third and final reading.
Okay, so you're making that motion to that, okay, that council direct administration to postpone third reading to bylaw number 18-14, land use bylaw, amendment bylaw, Lakewood Meadows. Pending further information. Sorry to, I guess I'm reading your words here. You've all heard that motion? All in favor? And that motion is carried, and it'll be coming back to us in a timely, efficient period. That takes us to, oh yes, we have one more bylaw to come forward and discuss. And that is on page 103, thank you. Page 103, bylaw number 18-16, Edgeview Road Borrowing Bylaw. Mr. Teedy, welcome to tonight's extravaganza.
Thank you, Your Worship. Council gave first reading to bylaw 18-16 Edgeview Road Borrowing Bylaw on July 18th. Subsequent to that, the bylaw was advertised for 2 weeks as provided for within the MGA. No comments or concerns were received by administration following the advertising of the bylaw. The effect of borrowing this money will be able to track the responsibility of the developer to repay the principal and interest. The borrowing will be done on a floating rate basis, repayable over 10 years, so that the financial impact will be $34,000 principal plus a small amount of interest. The debt utilization at the end of December 2017 was 31.5% of the provincial debt limit for the town. Borrowing of this amount is significantly less than what we repay every year as our debt obligation, so the impact on that percentage will be minimal. Those are my comments, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Teedy. Are there any questions or comments for Mr. Teedy as we move forward? Deputy Mayor Bauer?
Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Mayor Fuel, first, of course. I would just like to know, Mel, has this bylaw been ran by a lawyer so that we are making sure that with regards to him not fulfilling his obligation originally, that we have the jurisdiction to now develop this and then be able to recoup the funds for the road and the interest that we will incur by borrowing?
The bylaw itself will not provide any means to make payment from the developer, but what will happen is the developer agreement on the lands will be the instrument and the documentation used to provide a stick, if you'd like, for repayment.
And the developer agreement currently supports this?
Yes, I believe it does.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bauer. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm ready to give second reading to bylaw 18-16, Edgeview Road borrowing bylaw.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. You've all heard the motion for second reading. Is there any discussion or questions as we've got second reading on the table now? All in favor? And that motion is carried. Councillor Corbeil.
I move that council give third and final reading. Oh, no, do we have to do unanimous? No, do we have? No, not this one. Yeah. Give third and final reading to bylaw number 18-16 Edgeview Road borrowing bylaw.
Thank you, Councillor Corbeil. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? The motion is carried.
One more.
Councillor Cox.
I move that council authorize the mayor and CAO to sign the borrowing documentation to complete the borrowing.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? And the motion is carried. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Teedy. This now brings us to item 5, confirmation of minutes. 5.1, the minutes of the July 18th, 2018 regular council meeting. Deputy Mayor Bauer.
Thank you, Mayor Fuel. I was just noticing that under council attendance that I was noted twice to be there, although me and myself were there, my id was not. But then on page 2, the delegations, I noticed under 4.2 with the Strathmore and District Agricultural Society, point 2 says that the society is requesting an MOU to include agricultural grounds and ball diamond expansion. My notes say that they actually asked for a feasibility study to study whether or not there would be ball diamond expansion. So, and the feasibility study cost was $25,000. So if everyone agrees with that, could we add that on? And that's everything. Was the Councillor Sobel thinks that it might have been 50.
I thought it was 50 and our part was 25.
Well, our sponsorship was 25.
Yep.
Yes.
Anyway, it was for a feasibility study at any rate.
Yes, and there is a cost involved with that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, you've all heard did you make a motion to accept them as amended?
I move to accept the minutes as amended.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bauer. You've all heard that motion for the amendments. All in favor? And the motion is carried. Speeding right along. There are no tabled items, I believe. So we're on to item 7, items from administration. 7.1, the 2018 municipal census results, which is on page 15 of the brochure. Page 17. Sure. Jennifer, are you speaking to this?
Yes,
Thank
Your
you.
Worship. I'll be as quick as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Council has already approved the 2018 census results, and we'll just go through a few of the highlights from the census for this year. It was conducted over the months of April, May, and June, and all information was collected as of the April 15th date that Council chose earlier in 2018. The gathering of the information was done in 2 stages. That was online and door-to-door enumeration. 3,076 households responded to our census online. That's about 53.3% of all the dwellings in Strathmore. And that's an increase from our last census of 5.3%. So that's encouraging to see that people are taking advantage of the online census. We had 9 census enumerators conduct the door-to-door enumeration on the remaining households until June 30th, 2018, which was the deadline. And the last census taking of the community was done by the federal government in 2016. However, we have not included those numbers in this report so that we are consistent with the data that we have collected. It's important to note that the federal census is a mandatory census for all citizens, whereas a municipal census is not. Even though we have collected the information from 98% of all the dwellings in Strathmore, all dwellings may only have participated in parts of the census as well. So they could have answered 1 or 2 questions, but not all of them, and the results reflect that. So this slide here indicates the number of zones that we had in Strathmore. We divided the community up into 13 zones and assigned enumerators to go out and enumerate them all. And we divided them that way for feasibility in getting neighborhoods done, really. So the highlights from our census, the results of the enumeration show that our population is at 13,528 people. This represents a growth from our last municipal census of 201 people, or 1.51%. This does, however, indicate a decrease from the federal numbers in 2016 of 228 people. Dwellings in Strathmore grew by 0.98% from 2015, which represents 58 new dwellings. The completion rate that was accomplished was 98%, so 98% of all dwellings in Strathmore were enumerated. We analyzed the results and divided the total number of residents in each zone as indicated on the map in front of you. As you can see, our most populated zone is Strathaven with a total number of 1,964 residents. This represents 14.5% of the population. Hillview and Lakewood followed closely with 1,787 residents, or 13.21% of the population. Our smallest zone is Thorncliffe and Parkwood neighborhood with 627 residents, or 4.63% of the population. In the next slide, we have a chart that gives you a visual of the populations of each zone. So you can see there how Strathaven is the most populated and Parkwood the least. Strathmore has grown by 6,073 people since 2001. That represents an increase of over 81% in the last 17 years. And this slide shows that. There are a total of 5,989 dwellings. Of these, there are 229 vacant properties and 238 bare land or under construction properties. The community with the highest uninhabited dwellings is Wildflower and Strathmore Lakes with a rate of 26.32%, followed by Hillview and Lakewood with a rate of 12.63%. This is indicative of the construction taking place in these communities. Gender and age information was collected for 10,933 individuals in Strathmore. From the information that we have determined, from that information, we have determined that we have 5,308 males and 5,625 females. The age group that makes up the highest percentage of population is the 10 to 14-year-olds, followed by the 40 to 44-year-olds. I thought that was an interesting number. And this chart just shows you, gives you a visual of the population and the population divided by gender. We then divided the age groups, we then next divided the ages provided into the communities identified. So this chart just shows the age of our communities, I guess. We asked residents about their residency status. 77% of the population have indicated that they are Canadian citizens. We have 692 permanent residents. 76 people on visas, 4 refugee claimants, 14 temporary foreign workers, 13 other from those who decided to answer that question. We asked about the highest levels of education, and from this chart you can see the percent of population with the education levels indicated. And it's important to keep in mind that those are from the individuals who responded to that question. We wanted to know the employment status of individuals in the community. We have 3,890 citizens who work full-time, 710 work part-time, 1,828 are retired, and we have 289 individuals who are unemployed. The location of employment was another question we asked. We have 2,408 individuals who actually work in Strathmore, and there are 2,296 individuals who work either in Calgary or the Calgary region. Number of languages were indicated for people to identify what languages they speak in their households, and the majority is English with 4,223 individuals, or households, sorry, that's households. Income levels were also collected. The category with the highest number of households is the $40,000 to $80,000 range, with 774 households bringing in that income, followed by $80,000 to $119,000 range, with 670 households reporting that income. It's important to note that 507 households in Strathmore make less than $40,000 a year. And those were the results from the census. Any questions?
Councillor Sobel.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jen. Was Glenwood done?
Yes, Glenwood
Where would
is
that have been?
included with the downtown.
With the downtown?
Yes.
Thank you. And while we're on the downtown, I just want to note that that's our 4th most populated area in town. It is. Thank
Deputy Mayor Bauer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just wondering, Jen, I noticed a really high number of prefer not to answer in a lot of these different questions. Is there a way in developing our census in, I guess it'll be another 4 years, right? Is there a way to, because this demographic information is really important when we're budgeting and when we as a council are visiting a lot of our strategic priorities, is it helpful if we reword the beginning of the census to let people know that this information is so critical to how we function as a municipality?
Yeah, we really tried when we rolled the census out this year to inform the public why we collect this information, because we do have to have a reason for collecting that information. Is there a way we can reword it? I think probably more public education around how we use the information would be important. That may help in it. That said, it is not a mandatory census. It is completely voluntary.
Then I would just like to ask our media here if perhaps we would be able to include that as part of this discussion and just say that this is very important to get out to our public, that the census information was presented to us. However, we would like to have more involvement from our community because it does impact how we designate our money, which is their tax dollars. Thank you.
If we don't
Yes.
getting some guidelines or some talking points that you'd like to, move forward, we definitely take those into account as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Montgomery and then Councillor Sobel.
Thank you, Worship. I am interested to know, based on, analysis that I'm sure administration will do, what ideas administration will have with regards to directing services to specific communities based on the various demographic differences that have been noted here. And obviously, I don't expect an answer now, but I look forward to hearing that, so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. Did you want that in an administrative inquiry? Or, okay, we'll get Councillor Montgomery to do that since none of us could repeat what he said. Councillor Sobel.
So just curious, what do we use for an official population of our community? Is it the federal census?
Your worship, it'll be whatever the provincial government decides. If they accept our numbers, then we will use
Well,
the numbers that we have.
so this is down from the federal, from the last federal.
That's right.
So my concern is that we lost at least 2% of our population in this survey.
This is the latest census, so I will have to double check. I'll
But if
have to
you-
check into that. But I would assume that these are our latest census numbers, and that would be the numbers that they would use.
Do you have a figure for average occupants per dwelling?
It's in there, yeah.
Is it? I looked and I couldn't see it.
Yeah, there's a chart.
I just worry this one's
So-
not mandatory.
Well, that's right.
It's
not-
2.26.
2.26, okay, I was gonna go 2.5, so, but I guess my point is, if you go with that number, all of a sudden, we're at a different number if we went with those, whatever number of residences didn't go, so I guess, I'll leave it to you, you check with the province, but,
Your worship, I'll get back to
you know,
council
we should,
on that
I
question.
would like us to stay with the higher number, obviously.
Thank you,
And do you know when the
Councillor.
next federal census is? Sorry, Your Worship.
Your worship, I believe it's every 5 years, so 2021.
Thank you.
Councillor Corbeil, thank you, Councillor Sobel.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have a follow-up. Maybe, it's skewed because of the number of people that aren't answering the survey? Because I don't think that they're including those members in their house,
Yeah,
are
I
they?
can speak to that a little bit. So we did have, so like I indicated, response rate was 98%. So that it does exclude about 126 households, 128 households in Strathmore. We did make every opportunity we could to contact those individuals. Basically, we had a minimum of 5 attempts to try and contact them. However, it is not a mandatory census, but that could explain the difference in number.
What I'm meaning though also is because I'm not sure if everyone that we talk to, because you see in a lot of the answers or whatever, prefer not to answer, so maybe they just preferred not to answer the whole survey. Do you know what I'm saying? Like when we went out, oh, sorry. Exactly, they turned it in but didn't want to answer anything. So I'm thinking some of those households that's included, like some of them were like 2,500 prefer not to answers. Like that's still quite a few people, so I'm thinking maybe that's some of the issue because it's not mandatory, so anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Corbeil. No, that's a good point. Any other questions or comments? Then we're looking for a motion to accept the census results as information. Did we already make
Your
that
worship,
motion?
this was just for council's
Oh, okay.
information. Council already approved the
Okay, so we
results.
don't need a motion. Thank you. Item 7.2, 2018 citizen survey results. Jen, is that you again?
That's me again, yes. So just. Okay, along with the census, council instructed administration to conduct a citizen survey. The survey was included questions regarding various matters within the community, from cannabis to recreational to cultural needs. Every resident was given the opportunity to participate in the survey. The survey was made available online, and paper copies were also provided to citizens who did not have online access. In all, we collected 787 responses to the survey. It would indicate that as 787 households responded to the survey. Legislative Services is now happy to provide council with the results this evening. So we first asked everyone, what are the most important services that the town of Strathmore provides to you? Road maintenance was ranked as the most important, followed by utilities and protective services. The services were ranked by citizens as the least important, included community grants and youth programming. This could be indicative of the season that we were in. There was, in regards to road maintenance, it was one of our number one issues at that time, so that could be indicative of the results, that part of the survey. The next question we asked was, what should the town's priorities be over the next 3 years? The responses were ranked from highest to lowest. The top ranked answers were all very close, some only 2 votes off, and they included lower taxes, increased road maintenance, economic development, and financial sustainability. Lower ranked priorities included increases to social services, communication and collaboration, and beautification. We asked what kinds of physical activities households participated in. A large portion of respondents indicated they participated in outdoor walking. That was 66% of all participants indicated that they participate in that, followed by swimming and working out. The highest priority identified by 58% of respondents was for recreational and cultural needs was parks and pathways, followed by 25% of respondents for accessible fitness facilities, then 22% of respondents for new indoor ice surfaces. 20% indicated arts and culture facilities, and 13.48% indicated outdoor playing fields. We also asked if there were other priorities that we did not include, and some popular responses, and this is responses with more than 2 responses, indicated bowling alleys, dog parks, baseball diamonds, low-income recreational programs, accessible facilities, benches and washrooms along pathways, play courts, and new arenas. We asked if there would be support for a tax increase to fund new recreational facilities, and 64% of respondents indicated that they were not in favor of a tax increase. If there was to be a tax increase, the majority of respondents indicated that they would favor a 1% increase, which is equivalent to approximately $120,000 a year total revenue.
I don't remember, was that only the people that said yes, they got the vote on that one, or was it everybody?
I believe that was everybody. The town is considering creating an all-access pass for recreational facilities. We asked people what they'd be willing to pay for that pass. The majority of respondents indicated that they would be willing to pay up to $200 per year. We asked what community events everyone attended in town, and Canada Day and the Strathmore Stampede, as you can see, are most attended events, and they are followed by the Santa Claus Parade and the Spirit of Christmas. We asked on a scale of 1 to 10 how people would rate their ability to access support services in Strathmore, and Strathmore ranks a 6 out of 10 for accessibility to support services.
Your Worship, just a quick comment. I just going back a page. I just want to give a shout out to Tracy and her crew there in regards to downtown night markets. You know, they came out very well in the survey.
Very recent.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Sobel.
Could I make a point as well?
Sure. Councillor Montgomery?
I just think like it'd be more helpful rather than getting like kind of the average number of like the total responses, if we could almost like see like kind of similar to these other charts, or if we saw like, you know, the number of people that, you know, voted like 0 or 1 or 2 or 3, just so we could kind of see like, no, like on like the scale of 1 to 10 for like accessing different support services and stuff like that.
Your Worship, I can get that information available. It's fairly lengthy, but I can have that available to anyone who would like.
Yeah, like even just like kind of like a bar chart, like similar to the other ones. It would just mean a lot more, I think.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery.
On the same scale, we asked people to rate from 1 to 10 how they would rate Strathmore as a welcoming community, and again, the result was a 6, was the average. We asked, actually, this is really encouraging, we asked if anyone would be interested in any volunteer positions for emergency management, and we received 164 responses indicating that they were interested, and we obtained 133 contact information for individuals. Can't speak. It was indicated that the best form of communication that citizens use to access town information was our website. That was followed closely by local newspapers, then social media. 70% of respondents indicated that the website is their best form of communication. So I found that quite encouraging. Other responses to that question included email, letters via mail, radio station, and text to phones, which we have all of that. We asked if there was any support in placing minimum distance restrictions that cannabis retail stores could be from a number of facilities, including elementary schools, universities, other retail stores, liquor stores, and organizations such as drug treatment centers. There was outstanding support for minimum restrictions from elementary and high schools and drug and treatment centers and homeless shelters. And there was support really across the board for restrictions for all of the facilities indicated. Other responses included restrictions from playgrounds and recreational facilities, daycares or other childcare facilities. We had some comments not in town at all, from hospitals and from community centers. We asked what do you think about the rules around public consumption of cannabis should be? 49% of the respondents indicated that the rules should be a combination of the more restrictive rules for both drinking alcohol and smoking or vaping in public. 20% of respondents felt the rules should be more like the rules for drinking alcohol in public, and 12% felt the rules should be more like the rules for smoking or vaping tobacco in public. We asked for the respondents to indicate what places they felt were acceptable for people to consume cannabis. 96% felt that it was acceptable for individuals to consume cannabis in their own backyard, and 67% felt it was acceptable on one's own front porch. There was less support for other public places. And then finally, we asked in general, how satisfied are you with the services the town of Strathmore provides? 64% of respondents indicated that they were either satisfied or very satisfied with the town services. 25% were neither satisfied nor dissatisfied, and approximately 10% of respondents were either dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. And that was that.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson.
Your Worship, I noticed that there's been many questions on the in the community, and Councillor Bauer has referenced, or Deputy Mayor Bauer has referenced it previously, and that is questions about to what lengths has council gone to confer with community around legalization of cannabis and how that will roll out in our community. And I thought separating this and highlighting it on our website might be a good idea.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Councillor Montgomery.
I would like to move that we extend the meeting for 1 hour till 10:30.
Thank you. Yeah, we're approaching the 9:30 mark, so we have a motion on the floor to extend the meeting to a maximum of 1 hour. Councillor Sobel shaking his head vigorously. Okay, you've all heard that motion. All in favor? And we have a motion to extend that's been carried. Thank you, Councillor Montgomery.
Welcome, everybody.
Councillor Cox, questions or comments about the... Oh, okay. Any other comments about the survey results?
Thanks to Jen and her team.
Yes, thank you again to everyone involved. Thank you very much. 7.3, the Arts Incubator Tour, which is on page 61 of your council handout. Mr. Roycroft, are you speaking to this?
Your Worship, I think the item, I won't do a formal presentation. I think the item explains itself. This was an initiative proposed by Councillor Peterson. And we'll just position it as an administration-directed initiative to explore that arts incubator in Calgary and to look for the invitation from, and I forget the name of it already.
Workshop Studios.
Perfect, yeah. Workshop Studios. So we will, if council supports it, staff will reach out to, haven't done that today, we'll reach out to Workshop and arrange times and dates and everything.
Thank you, Ryan. Councillor Peterson?
I would move that council direct staff to arrange a site tour and discussion with Workshop Studios on community arts incubators. And Your Worship, if I just might speak to this, because I don't know the answer to the question, but for all of council that are interested in incubators and how it would roll out in this community, I know Ryan already has lots of information about that, but we have some business people in our community, a couple that I know of too, that have evinced significant interest, and I was wondering if we might invite the chamber to, or somehow to invite 2 members to come with us. I don't know, I'd leave that in your purview, but.
Absolutely, Your Worship. I think we'll reach out to Workshop and see how many people they're comfortable accommodating. And
Yep.
then maybe we'll just use our, we'll probably base the invite list then on people who will intend to name to the Tourism Committee or to the Downtown Vitalization Committee and
Yep.
go from there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. You've all heard the motion that's on the floor.
Can I say
Oh,
something?
Deputy Mayor Bauer, you had a comment? Sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to say thank you so much to Councillor Peterson for bringing this idea to administration. And I understand that at the back it says now that the funds, the cost for this will be funded out of the economic development budget. Was that a mutual decision that you made? Because originally you had proposed this idea and it would come out of your own personal PD budget.
Yeah, I was overruled, Councillor Bauer, and I bow to the knowledge of planning and development.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bauer. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? And the motion is carried. Item 7.4, additional leased office space, okay. Thank you. Mr. Legore, you're coming forward for this?
Yes.
And if for clarification, is this the architects, the new town hall, maybe something?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. New town hall project architects, thank you, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. As you know, the town has embarked upon the planning for a new town municipal building, and we have been engaged with the firm of Gibbs Gage Architects doing all the preliminary work, and administration's recommendation is that we sign a contract with them to provide the architectural, electrical, mechanical, structural, and construction management services for development of the new town hall. And with that, I'm prepared to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Legore. I have one question, and then I have one question. Oh, okay, we can come back to this. Thank you. I didn't see this. Sorry, Mr. Legore, my question would be, and I just wanted verification of this, the architects that we engage, if we pass this, the contract to provide the design and structure drawings, they would not be site-specific. They could apply to any place the town hall could be located. It's just the actual design of the building?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Bauer and then Councillor Sobel.
I'm ready to make a motion, Your Worship.
Okay. And then Councillor Sobel, you're comfortable speaking after the motion
Oh,
comes forward?
absolutely.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Bauer?
I move that council authorize the mayor and CAO to sign a contract with Gibbs Gage Architects to provide architectural design, electrical, mechanical, structural, and construction management services for the development of a new town hall.
Thank you. And with the motion on the floor, Councillor Sobel, did you have a comment or a question?
Just a question, do we have a cost on this?
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Sobel, we won't have a cost until we determine the final design of the building. It'll be approximately 10% of the cost of the new facility. So we don't have a cost on it at this time. We're still in the concept stage, and it'll have to be within budget, of course.
So, thank you. So are we, I'm just thinking of the legalities here, are we able to bypass our usual, I think this would be a substantial check at the end of the day. Are we able to bypass our tendering process?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I have consulted with legal counsel, and we are on firm grounds here in awarding the contract to Gibbs Gage Architects.
Okay.
Any other questions, Councillor Sobel? Thank you. You've all heard the motion that's on the floor. All in favor? And the motion is carried. Thank you, Council. Thank you, Mr. Legore. And I believe the second item is 7.4, additional leased office space.
Yes. No, I've got it here.
Did you want to speak to this, Mr. Legore?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. As you know, we are overtaxed in office space for staff. In fact, you're almost afraid to go on holidays because you come back, you may not have a workstation to be at. We investigated two alternatives. We investigated leasing office space, and we also investigated leasing modular units to put two additional modular units on the lot here. And from a health and well-being of the organization, we think it's better to lease office space. The modulars would not have any washroom facilities or anything like that. They would just be heated facilities. You'd have to go to another building to use washrooms. And when we looked at it, while it is a little more expensive, it's certainly better for the staff to lease space. And we have been able to get a good lease, and we're recommending that, that we proceed with the lease as recommended.
Is that the building
Over here.
the Strathmore School?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a large open space with some offices. It requires very, very nominal improvements to make it suitable for our group.
Just a quick question, Mr. Legort. Have you specified which departments or office people might be going there? That's not a big factor, but just...
The naughty
We
ones.
certainly have had discussions, but those happened during Mr. Thackeray's vacation, and we have to consult with him now that he's
So
back.
you've moved him over there?
It was done without his input, so to be fair, we have to consult with him to make sure that he's comfortable with what we're proposing.
Councillor Montgomery and then Councillor Sobel?
So I'm just wondering what the cost of is there going to be renovations done to make it usable for us?
As I stated, very, very nominal renovations.
Okay.
We're going to put some storage shelves on one back wall, and that'll basically be it. The staff room is large enough that we'll be able to use for another meeting room there. And we have another office there that we'll be able, that's quite large, that we'll use for a meeting room as well, interviews for staff, et cetera, meeting with developers. It is ideally suited for the operations.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sobel?
Just one question and one comment. How many years is this lease for?
We're leasing it for 2 years with a 2-year option on it.
Okay, thank you. And my comment, especially in regards to the meeting room, I've been a proponent for a number of years for a new hall, and this really demonstrates why we need a new town office. When we talk about busting at the seams, that's what we're doing, and it's we have committee meetings that we meet in some pretty weird places because where there's just no room left. So all that to say is, on the item before this in regards to our new town office, this is not something that I don't think anybody in this council feels they want. It's a matter that it's needed, and it's specifically needed for our staff. So thank you for this.
To you, Mr. Mayor, since I've been here, I've witnessed a management meeting held on the lawn of this facility, because there's absolutely no room in this building to hold a meeting. The other unique thing about this lease is we did research with Golden Hills on the utility costs for that building, and we felt that they were higher than they should have been, so we've been able to negotiate with the landlord a fixed cost for utilities, which is substantially less than what Golden Hills, because it's very high ceilings there. It will be costly, so we have eliminated that cost to us by reducing the fee for that.
And thank you for doing that due diligence to work on the cost of that lowering, and that's really good. That's very good. Thank you. Councillor Montgomery.
I would like to make a motion that council authorize the transfer of $10,000 from the Financial Stabilization Reserve for 2018 to cover the costs of the lease for this year.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. You've all heard the motion. Any more discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you, everybody. That brings us to item 7.6, committee appointments, page 71. Jennifer?
Thank you, Your Worship. We've received an application from a citizen to be appointed to the Downtown Vitalization Committee. We're recommending the appointment of Miss Marlene Risden to the Downtown Vitalization Committee for a term ending October 31st, 2018.
Thank you. Councillor Sobel?
With a motion, Your Worship.
Thank you.
I would move that administration, the council appoint Marlene Risden to the Downtown Revitalization Committee for a term ending October 31st, 2018.
Thank you, Councillor Sobel. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? Motion is carried.
Your Worship.
Councillor Peterson.
Just because, she's been appointed for a month, somebody could just maybe explain that that's just the norm and There'll be reappointments.
Ms. Sawatsky, did
Yes,
you
Your
want to
Worship,
speak
we
to
will
that?
do that.
Okay, okay, good, perfect. Thank you very much. That brings us to item 7.7, items from administration. Sorry, Deputy Mayor Bauer.
May I please ask a question about
Sure.
that appointment? Is Marlene Risden being appointed as a member at large or as the business member? Because I know that the Downtown Vitalization Committee was looking to fill a vacant position, but they were also looking to fill a business owner's position.
I think we have a couple vacancies, don't
Yeah.
we?
Bless you. Bless you.
Can I just ask you for clarification later? And then if there's still another position, we can go from there?
Thank you, Deputy
Thank
Mayor
you.
Bauer, for that clarification. And that brings us to 7.7, items from administration, ministerial order number MSL 047/18, extension of timeline for intermunicipal collaboration frameworks and intermunicipal development plans. Mr. Thackeray, are you speaking to this one?
Thank you, Your Worship. This is just a note from the Minister of Municipal Affairs, Mr. Anderson, and the ministerial order is appended to this, and it's a housekeeping item that they've requested us to consider, and so it was put before council to pass a resolution, should you wish, to put an extension on the ICS and the MDPs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thackeray. Councillor Peterson.
I'd move that council apply the extensions as provided in ministerial order number and letter MSL 047/18 for the creation of all ICFs and IDPs.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? And that motion is carried. Which brings us to item 8, committee reports. 8.1, reports from committees on which councillors sit. Councillor Sobel.
Just a short one, Your Worship, and I apologize, I don't have this in writing. I would like to comment on a couple of recent meetings I've had with the Chamber of Commerce. And when I say a couple, I mean two, one in late August and one today. The Chamber is on a road to some very, I think, very unique steps at this point. We're focusing on strategic planning. That was the first meeting in August. It was 3 hours. It's being facilitated by Community Futures Wild Rose, and it was really an exciting morning that we spent there because the board realized that you know, for a foundation as to where they were going, moving ahead, there was some lack of information. So we're going to spend the rest of this year focusing on that issue. And when I say focus, that will be taking most of our time. In fact, the Chamber's awards night was canceled as of today. In an effort to do exactly that, to reconsider their direction and focus on. I think the future is going to have the board focusing on a fewer areas, but doing them in a smarter and more effective way. So that's the Chamber of Commerce, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Sobel. Did you have another one as well?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Bauer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to say for the Strathmore overnight shelter that Councillor Peterson, the director of the shelter, Elizabeth Karp, myself, we met with the RCMP here in town to finalize the last pieces of the puzzle and let people know that we are getting ready to open. I've just received word from Elizabeth today that in fact we will be open by the end of the week. So I just want to let everyone know that the shelter will be accepting clients and volunteers will be in place so that it will be opening. And then a grand opening and that type of thing, we're looking at another month or two.
Just subsequent to that, Your Worship.
Councillor Peterson.
Just many thanks to Emergency Services for assisting in with supplies through our director, through Trent West. Very grateful to he and Catherine for their work in that, and also we still have one fire inspection to get through, and then we'll be on our way.
Thank
And,
you, Councillor Peterson.
Great thanks to Deputy Mayor Bauer, who spent countless hours putting together a comprehensive volunteer handbook, and it was a lot of work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Deputy Mayor Bauer, for all your work in that. And I appreciate all the work that the members of the committee have done, as well as our staff and administration. This is a much-needed project, and it's great to see that it's almost here. Thank you. Councillor Corbio.
Thank you, Your Worship. We just attended WDEMSA last night. WDEMSA Chair Glenn Kester recommended the Growth Management Board set up an advocacy committee for issues of import to participants in the Calgary Growth Metropolitan Board. There is now advocacy committees. Holy man, I'm having troubles today. And Amber Link, Councillor Amber Link, is the County of Wheatland representative. One order of business before the committee is the issue of ambulance callouts and dispatch. The only other thing they said is WDEMSA's call volumes for July and August were 2,553 for the year, which is an increase of 1.5%, so very minimal.
Thank you, Councillor Corbio. Councillor Peterson.
There's a lengthy Marigold report. I'll just read it to all of you. No, I won't. Just to note, the building process and their partnership building is well underway. They have really good support across the region and the 43 municipalities, and their Schedule C for 2019 has been approved.
Thank you for that, and that's great news as we move forward. Any other reports from councillors? And then I believe we're looking for a motion.
So move, Your Worship, acceptance of the reports.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. You've all heard that motion. All in favor? And the motion is carried. We've done the bylaws already. Item 11, I don't believe we have urgent business. Item 12, questions between councillors and council statements. Councillor Peterson?
I just have one very brief question. In 2015, council made a motion to approve a trailer storage facility on the edge of town, just on the west side of the graveyard. I was under the understanding that, and this should be an admin inquiry, I understand that, but I think in that motion, there were supposed to be trees put along the side as a barrier, and I think that was mentioned in the actual motion, but I'm not certain of that. Do you want me to put that in admin inquiry? Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Bringing us to item 13, are there any administrative inquiries tonight?
Yes, Your Worship. From Councillor Peterson, in 2015, council made a motion to approve a trailer storage facility on the edge of town. Was there to be trees along the property as a barrier? Can admin investigate? And
Thank you for that efficiency, too.
I also have two from Councillor Montgomery. The first is, based on the latest community census, what ideas does administration have with regards to directing services to communities based on the various demographic differences that have been noted? And the second inquiry reads, can we look at installing change tables in any men's bathrooms that the adjacent women's bathrooms have them? And then finally, an inquiry from Councillor Sobel in regards to Communities in Bloom profile booklet. Some time ago, the Communities in Bloom Committee, in partnership with town administration, produced a booklet that focused on a number of efforts centered on how Communities in Bloom was worked tirelessly in Strathmore to beautify and green our growing community. By all accounts, this booklet was very well received, and there were subsequent requests for copies. My question is whether there will be additional copies of this booklet made available to the public. Your Worship, I can answer that. Yes, administration has ordered additional copies of the booklet.
You know how many?
I'm sorry, Your Worship, I cannot comment at this time.
Thank you for that, and thanks for those administrative inquiries, councillors. That brings us to the end, and I'm looking for a motion to go back in camera. Councillor Montgomery has made that motion. All in favor? And we're in camera at 9:50.